The entire legacy of Hayao Miyazaki in one video. When people think about legends of animation, the groundbreaking aesthetic of Studio Ghibli is probably one of the first things that comes to mind. Because under the leadership of Hayao Miyazaki, Ghibli films repeatedly redefined what it means to create a detailed and immersive animated world through hand-drawn craftsmanship and universally relatable stories about our relationship with each other and with nature. Across his lifetime, under the name Studio Ghibli, Miyazaki helped create a total of 24 films. And honestly, every single one of them is worth watching. The economic success of what many consider Ghibli's true starting point, Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, made the founding of Studio Ghibli in 1985 possible in the first place. Because through its post-apocalyptic science fiction fairy tale, Miyazaki already explored the central theme that would define his entire career: the complicated coexistence between humanity and nature. But instead of abandoning this idea, he continued developing it. Therefore, in Castle in the Sky, Miyazaki once again integrates environmental themes into the story, while portraying a peaceful symbiosis between technology and nature within a timeless adventure that effortlessly appeals to all generations. Yet no other Ghibli film demonstrates the emotional power of anime as mercilessly as Grave of the Fireflies, where the cruelty of war becomes the central focus alongside themes of compassion, responsibility, and humanity, creating an anti-war drama that lingers long after the credits end. Because unlike many war stories that rely on heroism or spectacle, this film removes all illusion of glory and instead confronts the audience with the quiet, unavoidable suffering of ordinary people, making it perhaps the most tragic and devastating film ever produced by Studio Ghibli. But what makes it especially painful is how real it feels. There are no monsters, no fantasy escape, only hunger, loss, and the slow collapse of hope experienced through the eyes of children who never truly understand why their world is falling apart. Therefore, Grave of the Fireflies becomes not only the saddest Ghibli film, but also its most human one, reminding viewers that the greatest tragedies are often not dramatic moments of destruction, but the silence that follows. My Neighbor Totoro was originally shown in double screenings alongside Grave of the Fireflies, partly because few believed the later studio mascot would actually succeed. Yet Miyazaki's own childhood became the blueprint for this gentle story that allows viewers to interpret it either as nostalgic memory or as belief in forest spirits. But what makes Totoro so enduring is that almost nothing dramatic truly happens, because Miyazaki understands that childhood wonder often exists within ordinary moments. Waiting for a bus in the rain, exploring unfamiliar forests, or discovering comfort in imagination during uncertain times. Therefore, the film captures something rare, a world seen entirely through the emotional logic of children, where fear and joy coexist naturally and magic feels possible simply because one still believes. Sometimes life really is that simple. Growing up, however, is rarely simple. Kiki's delivery service becomes a charming parable about adolescence and independence, deliberately avoiding artificial sentimentality or forced action in order to focus entirely on Kiki's journey towards self-reliance, portraying creative burnout, loneliness, and self-doubt long before such themes became common in animated storytelling. Because maturity in Miyazaki's world does not arrive through victory, but through uncertainty. Therefore, films like Only Yesterday move away from fantasy altogether, confronting self-reflection, longing, and the quiet realization that even after childhood and adolescence have passed, many people still struggle to understand who they truly want to become. And in doing so, Miyazaki expands his storytelling beyond imagination itself, showing that growing older does not mean losing wonder, only learning to recognize it differently. In Porco Rosso, humor and melancholy share the same cockpit, allowing Miyazaki, born into a family connected to aircraft production, to portray an ambivalent hero while simultaneously expressing a clear protest against fascism and war. But instead of presenting aviation as heroic spectacle, Miyazaki transforms flight into something deeply personal, shaped by nostalgia, regret, and the lingering scars of history, as Porco himself becomes a man literally turned into a pig, unable to reconcile his past with the world changing around him. Therefore, the skies in Porco Rosso feel less like escape and more like reflection. A space suspended between freedom and loneliness, where memories of lost comrades and forgotten ideals continue to follow the pilot wherever he flies. Because in Miyazaki's stories, flight is never just freedom, it is memory and consequence. With Princess Mononoke, Miyazaki once again returns to the conflict between humanity and nature, yet refuses simple black and white morality, presenting instead a morally complex struggle where no side is entirely right or wrong, as humans destroy the forest in order to survive, while the gods of nature fight to preserve a world already fading away. But instead of portraying villains and heroes, Miyazaki forces the audience to confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress and destruction often emerge from the same desire to live, turning the conflict into a tragic coexistence rather than a battle that can truly be won. Therefore, Princess Mononoke becomes one of his darkest and most mature works, confronting violence, industrialization, and humanity's place within nature with unprecedented emotional weight, proving that animation could tackle themes usually reserved for serious live-action cinema. And yet, immediately afterward, Ghibli moves from brutality to wonder, creating one of the most magical cinematic experiences ever made, Spirited Away. Later winning the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, tells the fantastical journey of a young girl filled with spiritual symbolism and emotional transformation, astonishing audiences through believable character growth and some of the most beautiful visual compositions in modern cinema. But beyond its fantasy setting, the film captures the universal fear of growing up and losing one's identity, as Chihiro slowly transforms from a frightened child into someone capable of responsibility and empathy. Therefore, the spirit world becomes more than imagination. It reflects human greed, loneliness, and change, which is exactly why Spirited Away resonated far beyond Japan and ultimately became one of the most influential animated films ever created. With The Wind Rises, Miyazaki delivers perhaps his most personal film, addressing sensitive historical themes through allegory while telling the story of creation itself, showing how dreams and beauty can exist alongside destruction. But what makes this film especially significant is that Miyazaki originally intended it to be his final work, announcing his retirement shortly after its release, as if this deeply introspective story about an artist creating something beautiful in a world moving toward tragedy was meant to mirror his own farewell to animation. And yet, he simply could not let go. Because even after closing what seemed like the final chapter of his career, Miyazaki returned once again to create more films, proving that for him, animation was never just a profession, but something inseparable from his identity. For me personally, The Wind Rises remains my favorite Miyazaki film, and perhaps his most underrated one, precisely because it abandons fantasy spectacle and instead confronts the quiet conflict between passion, responsibility, and the cost of pursuing one's dreams. But maybe his journey seems to come full circle. The Boy and the Heron feels less like another fantasy adventure and more like a farewell, as if Miyazaki himself is looking back on imagination, loss, childhood, and creation after a lifetime spent building worlds for others to escape into. Because unlike his earlier films, this story carries the perspective of an aging creator confronting legacy itself, a protagonist dealing with grief, inheritance, and the question of what remains after one generation passes its dreams on to the next. And considering Miyazaki's age, alongside his repeated retirements and returns throughout the decades, this film feels different, almost final, as if he is no longer creating a world for the future, but reflecting on the one he is preparing to leave behind. Therefore, The Boy and the Heron does not simply function as another Ghibli fantasy, but as a personal closing statement, a film about accepting loss, letting go, and trusting that imagination will continue even after its creator steps away. Because throughout his entire career, Hayao Miyazaki never simply created animated films. He created worlds, memories, childhoods. Thank you for countless magical hours, Studio Ghibli. Goodbye.